Thank you very much, Ms. Bond. Appreciate that. So committee members, good morning. I will call this joint committee of Assembly Ways and Means and Senate Finance Subcommittee on Higher Education to order. We have a very long agenda in front of us today. Those wishing to participate, as noted on the agenda posted today, gives you many opportunities to be able to participate by pre-registering online at the designated website. So with that, if I could have the committee secretary please call the roll.
Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Dondero Loop.
Here.
Senator Kiekefer.
Here.
Senator Ratty.
Here.
Senator Sievers-Gansert.
Here.
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Here.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
And Chair Carlton.
And I am here. Welcome to everyone. Good morning. Today we have the Nevada System of Higher Education. We have numerous folks in the Zoom with us to be able to answer all the questions. I believe we have Mr. Klinger available to start. And Mr. Klinger, if you would introduce the folks that you would like, if there's any opening remarks, and then I know you have a very comprehensive presentation for us, so we can go from there.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer for the Nevada System of Higher Education. And actually, first I will turn it over to Dr. Rose to go through the beginning of our presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Melody Rose. I have the honor of being the Chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education, and I'm pleased to kick off our presentation this morning. Andrew is going to be my wingman with the PowerPoint presentation, and he'll be sharing his screen momentarily. As he's bringing that up, I just want to thank you for your attention today. I know you have an awful lot of work, and I am pleased to be with you. I'm just completing my 6th month on the job here in Nevada and settling in and getting to know you all, and I thank you for your gracious welcome to the state. So today,
I just want to give the lay of the land to everybody that's here, so we're all kind of on the same page. My goal is to get through your presentation today. I think it's important for you to get all the information out onto the table, and then we'll go back, and different committee members have already requested different areas that they would like to ask questions. So I just thought it would be much easier to track that way rather than stopping and starting. So we are going to give you free rein to finish your presentation, and then we will ask our questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Carlton. I appreciate that. And with that, we're ready to roll here this morning. Again, pleased to be with you. Andrew, you can advance the slide. This is just a quick overview of how we intend to present our budget for you today. I am going to have the privilege of giving you just a brief overview. I recognize that you are here to consider our budget, but I thought it would be helpful to set NSHE in some context, give you a little bit of background about who we are, what we look like in terms of our student body and our institutions, and talk with you a little bit about my strategic objectives for NSHE as your chancellor. I'll also share with you some of our accountability measures. Very pleased to show you where we are making progress and a few sticky points where we are leaning in and need added attention. And then, of course, I'll turn things over to my colleague CFO Klinger, whom you all know, and he will go over the meat of the presentation around the budget and our request to you today. So that is the overview. Andrew, if you could move to the next slide. Again, I'm going to help you with strategic planning and the overview. You all know this map better than I have. I certainly have had the great opportunity of traveling the state and have visited just about every dot on this screen. And those that I have missed, I will hopefully be able to visit in the near future as conditions allow. But there you see all of our institutions and their physical locations across the state. Next slide. We are governed by a 13-member elected board of regents. For those of you who don't know us well, of course, we have 8 institutions. 7 of those are degree-granting institutions serving over 100,000 students. And I'd just like to pause on this slide and recognize our presidents who are with us today in the wings to answer your questions about their campuses. I couldn't be prouder of the team that I have around me. I think we have an incredible group of presidents leading our institutions. And probably I would point out to you, one of the most diverse groups of presidents in the nation. And it's a great honor to represent them today and knowing that they represent the population of Nevada. So thank you. Next slide. For those of you who have been in the chamber a long time, you will recognize this slide. Our regents adopted these 5 strategic goals about 3 years ago, and these goals really are the framework for everything that we do. We are laser focused on increasing access to our institutions, which means affordability, welcomeness. We also, of course, are focused on retaining and graduating those students. And that's really where your ROI comes in for the investment that you make in us. We are also keenly focused, and I'll be looking at this with some data in the slides upcoming, keenly focused on closing our achievement gap and making sure that all Nevadans have the opportunity to excel, to complete their degrees, and to contribute to our economy. We're also, as you all know, especially during a downturn, focused on our role as the sort of front line of workforce. And there's a lot to share with you there as well. And finally, we have goals around our research capacity. And that, of course, is concentrated on our 2 4-year universities and DRI, who are really solving real world problems and also experiencing a multiplier effect. When you invest in research, the rest of the nation invests alongside you. Next slide. I believe very firmly that in the old business adage that if it's not measured, it's not managed. And so what I have focused on since my arrival 6 months ago is taking those 5 strategic goals, which provide a tremendous foundation for our accountability and transparency with all of you. And I've really focused on doing 3 things to advance them. First is making sure that we are adding key performance indicators and targets to all 5 of those strategic goals, and can share with you in another setting what those look like. Secondly, I believe we need strategic system-wide initiatives to accelerate our efforts in these accountability measures. I won't go over them. You have them in the slide deck, but these are the initiatives that I have launched since my arrival that help us really make quicker progress in achieving those 5 strategic goals. And finally, I believe in the 21st century, higher ed doesn't do anything without strategic partnerships. It is absolutely key to our success, makes us better. And I've launched some really wonderful projects with Superintendent Ebert and intend to obviously add additional partnerships throughout my time here in Nevada. Next slide. Really, the focus for me this morning is to share with you who we are as institutions. Very, very briefly, of course, you know our two research universities, research very high classification through Carnegie, otherwise known as Tier 1 universities. These institutions, of course, make up roughly 51,000 of our 107,000 students in the system. Combined, they make tremendous contributions to the education of our population, but also to diversification of our economy, the culture of our state, creating basically the future knowledge economy is part of their mission, and they're moving forward on all of that very swiftly. Next slide, please. You also know, of course, our youngest institution is Nevada State College. It was established in 2002 and very deliberately established in order to provide four-year degrees that meet critical shortage areas, not least of which nursing and teaching. And they're doing a tremendous job there. In very short order, they have grown to 7,300 students enrolled, most of whom are first generation and underrepresented students. So serving a very critical population, predominantly in Southern Nevada. Next slide. Four community colleges are what we call comprehensive community colleges. As you know, they are, again, the workhorse of our system, absolutely focused, and in another opportunity, you might hear them talk about the ways in which they've adapted their short-term certificate programs in order to get Nevada back to work at this critical moment. They are also, of course, absolutely vital in terms of not just training, but also transfer. Most of our students of color in the state of Nevada rely on these two-year institutions as a start. It's a very approachable beginning to a degree, and roughly 70% of those students will move on into our four-year institutions. They're also a critical partner in remedial and developmental education, and again, account for roughly 50,000 students in the NG system. Next slide, please. Our one internationally recognized research institute has two campuses, as you all know, very much focused historically over the past 60 years on environmental research and discovery and solving real world problems. This is not abstract stuff. Our scientists at DRI cover 40 different disciplines. For every dollar that the state of Nevada invests in DRI, there is a multiplier effect of almost $5. So it's a really wonderful investment in solving the problems that our contemporary world faces. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to go over some of our accountability data so you can see how our students are doing. And this really is the work around return on investment. So just quickly, again, that is what our enrollment has looked like over the past decade. We got an unusual pop in enrollment in FY10, of course, due to that downturn, and our enrollment has been pretty stable since then, seeing a little bit of unsteadiness at the moment, again, given the downturn, but we have every expectation to pop back up in coming years. Next slide. This slide just shows you the distribution of those almost 108,000 students this fall, which campus that they sit on. Andrew went to great effort to make sure the color here for each institution actually represents their official colors. Next slide. Here we begin to just share with you what the student body actually looks like. Certainly you would see this if you walked around our campus. It's very important to know that most of our students at the community colleges and at NSC are part-time. They're juggling very complex lives with elders, with children, with jobs, and even at our 2 4-year universities, you see a plurality of students who are there part-time, again, with that juggle. And it's important in everything that we do that we recognize the complexity of our students' lives. and make everything as smooth and easy for them as we can as they make their way through their degrees. Next slide. Very, very proud to tell you that we are a majority minority institution. In other words, you can see here that in 2014, the number of students of color outpaced the number of white student matriculants. And that continues to be the case. I'm very proud of this fact because it indicates that we reflect the student body at entry reflects the state, and that will continue to be true. It's important for other reasons as well. As you know, this is the trajectory that our nation is on. And so Nevada really serves as a front line to the future of American institutions. And we have the opportunity to set the tone, to set the standard for how to serve our students well. It's also very important to note that one of the things that comes along with this level of diversity on our campuses is that almost every one of our institutions now carries the federal designation of Hispanic serving institution, which allows us to qualify for federal funding to serve those students better. And in fact, we've brought in several $1 million just in the past few years from the feds to support our Hispanic population. Next slide. Graduation rates, of course, this is the ROI that you depend on. And what you see here is a steady upward trajectory toward better and better completion rates, which means that those dollars that you're investing in us are paying off. And it means that we're deploying them strategically and thoughtfully. Those initiatives around advising, around other student supports, co-requisite support, all of that is paying off in our completion rates. And we continue to see that steady climb, which is exactly where we want to be. Next slide. Our newest institution here, again, steadily moving upward. I have every expectation that that number will continue to climb as we move into the future. Community colleges are next slide. And there too, you'll see that 3 of our 4 institutions at the community college level are well in excess of the national average. And CSN is working very, very hard and making good progress. And although it may not seem it to you, increasing your completion rate by 2 or 3 percentage points per year is tremendous and actually rarely seen nationally. So we're very proud of the efforts of our presidents and their teams on all of these campuses. Next slide. And this gets us to the investment that you have been making. What you see on this slide on the far left is in the blue is the median state appropriation based on FTE, full-time equivalent. And then the green portion is the student share of the cost of attendance. And what we've provided you here is a comparison. So if you just look at the 2 outermost bars, you will see that our state contributes on an FTE basis slightly more than the overall national median investment. And for that, I thank you. That makes a huge difference. Matriculated, retained, graduated, and out in their communities, generating jobs and contributing to our state. I should also point out to you that it is important to recognize that Nevada passes less of the cost on to its students. You see that number 4,644 on the far right. The national student average share is almost $7,000. And then in the middle 2 bars, what you see are the WICHE states. That's a regional association that represents the Western states. And even within that population of states, Nevada is sitting in a position of protecting our students from oppressive cost and therefore protecting them from debt service. So again, thank you for your contributions to what we do. I think we're making good on the promise and we're grateful for your commitment to us. Next slide. Just want to finish up my component of this presentation by telling you that there is a lot more information available to you. This year, we have produced what we are calling our accountability report. It contains all of those key performance indicators that I mentioned earlier. It shows you the metrics that are aligned with our board strategic goals. And that report should have arrived in your offices a few weeks back. And then if you really want to dig into the data, I would invite you to come to our website. There you can manipulate the data through our dashboards and slice it and dice it in any way that makes your heart sing. So it is our responsibility to be transparent and accountable to you. And these are the tools that we use in order to accomplish that goal. And with that, I will turn things over to my colleague, Andrew, who will lead you through our budget request. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer for the Nevada System of Higher Education. Good morning, Chair Carlton and members of the committee. First, I want to just spend a couple of minutes walking you through just a funding overview of NCHE. So this will include not only the state-funded portion of our budget, but wanted to, again, highlight our overall budget just for context for the committee. So our budgets are split into basically two groups. There are state operating budgets and then the non-state portion of our budgets. Obviously, the state operating budget includes the state appropriations. It also includes a portion of the registration fees that we collect. In the state operating budget, there are both what we call formula accounts and non-formula accounts. And I'll get into that a little bit as we get into the presentation. For the formula funded accounts, there's also what we call performance pool, which is a 20% carve out of those budgets, formula budgets, which has to be earned back by meeting certain metrics. On the non-state side, those are what we refer to as the self-supporting accounts. They would be grants and contracts and loan and endowments. Those are accounts where the funding stays within those accounts generally and balances forward from one year to the other. You can think of housing, sort of dormitories as an example of a self-supporting activity where you're collecting fees from students specific for housing, and all of the expenditures and capital related to that stays within those accounts. And like I said, those accounts carry reserves, and those reserves balance forward from one fiscal year to the next. So the next slide provides just a high-level overview of what fiscal year 20 looks like for NCHE. And I chose fiscal year 20 because we have audited financial statements for that, so it made presenting this a little bit easier. So that top bar represents all of the funds that we collect at NCHE. So this would be both state and non-state funds. The next two bars are basically if you took that top bar and broke it in half between state operating budgets and non-state funds, you would see the difference there. So the total all funds for NCHE that we collect is $1.98 billion. You can see if you look at that middle bar there, the state operating budget is a little over $1 billion of that. And primarily funded with state appropriations. The state appropriations are the blue portion of the bar. The red portion is the tuition and fees. So you can see in the state operating budgets, I generally say it's 2/3, 1/3. So it's 2/3 state funding, 1/3 tuition and fees. When you look at the bottom bar, which again are the non-state funds that are not presented to this committee or not presented to the legislature, but represent, again, all those self-supporting activities and grants and contracts, you can see the breakdown there of how that portion of our budget is funded. So again, the red represents tuition and fees. The green portion of that represents grants and contracts. So you can see that in the state operating budget, there are very little grants and contracts, but on the non-state side is where you see those funds show up. And those funds are typically restricted funds. The gold bar there represents the 240 million. That represents what we would refer to as sales and services. And again, that will be your dormitories, it'll be your food services, it'll be parking services. Those are the types of activities that you would see in that gold portion there of that bar. And then from there, you see gifts and other items on the non-fund side. The next slide basically does the same thing, but it looks at the expenditure side of the equation. So the previous slide was the revenues. This represents the expenditures. So again, the top bar represents all funds, both state operating budgets and non-state funds. And you can see in these graphs, the blue portion represents employee benefits and compensation. The red portion, supplies and services. And then green is scholarships. And then in the gold in this case is depreciation. And so you can see if you look at the middle bar, which is the state operating budget portion of that, it's roughly 82% employee salary and benefits. The red portion there, again, supplies and services. And then the sliver of green there on the end is scholarships. And then on the non-state side, you can see, again, those same activities. On the non-state side, roughly 52% of those funds represent employee pay and benefits. And just wanted to give sort of that context for the committee, because what we'll be talking about next are basically the focus on the middle bars in both of these sections, and we won't be necessarily talking about the non-state portion as we go through the presentation, but just wanted to give that sort of background and context before we move into the rest of the presentation. So next, wanted to walk through the governor's recommended budget. First, I'm going to start, and there's a few slides here that just provide a very high level overview of the changes in the budgets. And these will look familiar because you've seen these in our pre-session hearing, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on them, but just wanted to give you a high-level overview of the changes in our budget from 21 to the governor's recommendation for 22 and 23. And so maybe just to explain the columns real quick. So on the left-hand side are in this case, we're summarizing the formula-funded accounts, the professional school budgets, and then all the non-formula accounts. And as I get into the other slides, I'll break those down. That next column that says original fiscal 2021, that represents the original legislatively approved budget back in the 2019 legislative session. The revised fiscal 21 column, that represents the changes after the special session last summer that reduced not only our budget, but all state budgets due to the pandemic. And then 22 governor recommends is obviously that's what's in the governor's budget. Change over the original. So that shows the change in the governor's recommended funding for 22 compared to what was originally approved by this body back in 2019. So overall for fiscal year 22, you can see that's a 7.8% decline when you make that comparison. And then 23 again represents the governor's budget, and the same calculation there, comparing it back to the original legislatively approved budget in 2019, which is a 7.5% decrease compared to that budget. So this slide represents the breakout of what we call the formula budgets. So these are basically the teaching institution budgets. And as I get into some of the future slides, I'll talk about the funding formula and just some of the components of the funding formula and how it works. And again, same layout here with the original 21, the revised, and then the governor's recommended 22 and 23. Don't need to walk through all the numbers on this slide, but would just highlight the green bar at the bottom. And you can see that the overall change in budget for fiscal 22 is about 6.4% decline and a 6% decline in 23 compared to the original budget approved in 2019. Next is a representation of the professional schools, and again, same information showing those changes compared to the original budget and the governor's recommend 22 and 23. And again, would just highlight here on this slide the numbers on the green bar that represent the total there, 11.8% decline in 22 overall for the professional schools and 11.5% overall reduction in 2023. Next slide represents the non-formula accounts for UNLV. UNLV and UNR both have non-formula accounts, and then there are non-formula accounts that are outside of the institutions that I'll get to next. So this section here represents the non-formula accounts for UNLV. And again, we just highlight the bottom numbers there of a 12% decline in fiscal 22 and 11.8% decline in fiscal 23. Same information for UNR. This is a list of the UNR non-formula accounts. And again, you can see the overall changes there at the bottom in green. I will point out there is a footnote on here about the UNR engineering building debt service. That's not included in this graph, primarily because I couldn't fit it on the screen, but secondarily because that the funding for that, which was originally a general fund appropriation, was taken out during special session, and then in 22 and 23, again, no general fund is appropriated for the UNR engineering building debt service. The debt service for that building is still being paid for by the state, but it's being paid for out of the bond interest and redemption account, which is the account within the treasurer's office that normally services our general obligation bonds. So it's still being covered by the state. It's just not being covered with state general funds. And then lastly, these are all the other non-formula accounts within INCHI. You can see system computing, the SSOG grant, system administration. And again, you can see the changes there for each one of those budgets and for this group in total compared to what was approved by the legislature back in 2019. Next, I want to walk through just a summary and again, a sort of a table by table review of the 12% budget cuts. So the previous screens that I show you are the overall funding change. The next series of slides that I'm going to show you are the specific reductions within each of the group of accounts that was asked for by the governor's office when we presented our budget and are included in the governor's recommendation. So overall, when you look at INCHI, the total there, again, if you look at the green bar, 169 million over the 2-year period. And again, I've broken those down by the formula funded accounts, the professional schools, and the non-formula accounts. And so you can see a bulk of those reductions are in the formula funded accounts because they are the largest recipients of state general fund, followed by the professional schools, and then the non-formula accounts. So now I'll get into a breakdown of the same numbers there, but instead of looking at it by institution or by funding type, this looks at it in broad categories. So the first there is salary savings. This represents either holding positions vacant as part of these 12% reductions, or in some cases, it represents position eliminations, followed by the operating reductions. And so the 12% reductions, when you look at it across NCHE, about 55% of it comes from what I'll call salary savings. And again, that's a combination of holding positions vacant and position eliminations, with 43% coming from other reductions. And then you see a small amount there in travel. Next, I'll give you a summary of the 12% cuts in the formula funded accounts. So again, this is a list of the formula funded accounts, and here are the specific 12% cuts for each of the teaching institutions, which again makes up a bulk of the cuts, 124.6 million. If you're looking there at the bottom right portion of that chart, and you can see the breakdown for each of the teaching institutions for fiscal year 22, fiscal year 23, and then the total for the biennium. Here's a breakdown of the professional schools. So it's the 2 schools of medicine, the law school, the dental school, and then DRI. And again, these cuts over the biennium, again, looking at the far right bottom, represent 26.4 of that 169 million total that I showed on the first line. And again, you can see the breakdown for each of those institutions by fiscal year, and then the total for the biennium for those institutions. Next, I wanted to spend some time just talking about the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. So we're anticipating receiving 112 million in total from the HERF funds. This doesn't include some of the special allocations. There's an allocation for minority serving institutions, for example, that is not represented on this table here. But this is the main portion of the HERF funds, as we call them. So you can see here again, 112 million total. Similar to the CARES Act, or actually exactly the same amount as the CARES Act, 29.9 million of that goes to students as student aid, which then leaves a balance of 82 million for the institutions to offset from the impact of the COVID pandemic on the institutions. This slide here gives you a breakdown of a high-level breakdown of how those HERF funds will be used across the system. And Chair Carlton and members of the committee, I need to just make a correction here. So the 2 columns there, what you see on the slide that says fiscal 21 and fiscal 22, in the handout that I sent to your staff yesterday, those are labeled fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. And so I made that correction in the slides, but wanted to make that correction on the record. If anybody's looking at the handout and not looking at the slides, it should be fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. So this provides a breakdown of how the institutions plan on using those HERF funds. So the first column there represents revenue declines as a result of anticipated declines in enrollment. So this is going to be your registration and tuition fees, and you can see that 27.4 million of those HERF funds will be used to offset those revenue losses. The next line is also revenue loss, but this is revenue lost specifically in those self-supporting activities that I talked about earlier. So this is going to be in housing, food services, and other areas where institutions are facing declines as a result of the pandemic. And so you can see on that line, it's 27.3 million overall if you look at the far right. The next line, or the third line down, says accommodate social distancing. So this would be anything from additional courses that the institutions need to make to maintain social distancing for in-person classes. And you can see that across the system, that is 14.6. The next line labeled emergency financial aid. So the institutions are planning on distributing 8.6 in emergency aid to students. So this would be direct aid as well as other assistance directly to students. And this is in addition to the 29.9 million of the HERF funds that will go directly to students. This is on top of that amount. And then finally, the last category there is just assist the institutions in covering other shortfalls, a total across the system over fiscal 21 and 22 of 4 million. And so you can see there the total 82 million represents the same amount that we'll receive in HERF funds for the institution portion. So next, I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the components of the funding formula. In the past, I've sort of walked through all of the calculations on the funding formula. So I'm not going to do exactly that, but I wanted to at least give the members an overview of the components that are included in the funding formula. Because this, as you saw in the previous slides, I mean, this represents the main funding allocation for the teaching institutions. And so that first bullet there, general fund only. So the funding formula is what we call a distribution formula. So it really takes the general fund only portion that the state provides, and it allocates it to the institutions based on what we call weighted student credit hours. And so it doesn't have an impact on the registration fees or tuition portion of that. It really just distributes the state general fund to the teaching institutions. The formula focuses on outputs or course completions, doesn't focus on necessarily on enrollments. And so the major portion of the funding formula is student credit hours. So student credit hours completed, and think of a student credit hour as, you know, you take an English 101 course and it's 3 student credit hours. So that's what that represents. The next portion that sort of goes into the formula is there is a what we call a discipline matrix, and there are various clusters within that discipline matrix where the courses are weighted. So there are weights on the courses from 1 all the way up to 8.8 for doctoral programs at the universities. And so just to give you an example, lower division math, liberal arts, and social sciences would have a course weighting of 1, but a doctoral program, for example, in those same areas would have a course weighting of 5.5. And that is important when you start doing the calculations on the formula, because the last item on that list is weighted student credit hours. And basically what weighted student credit hours is simply taking those student credit hours completed and you multiplying by the weight of the course. So if it's a course that's weighted 1 and it's a 3 credit hour course, that the weighted student credit hour is simply 3. So it's just doing the math. And that is really the primary driver of the formula, if you will, is that calculation of weighted student credit hours. And that's how the funds are distributed to the institutions, is based on those weightings relative to the other institutions. I talked a little bit about the application of the weighted student credit hours already. And just to sort of reiterate that point, it's really each institution receives a share of general fund proportionate to their share of the weighted student credit hours. And you'll see that as I get into some of the other slides. Non-resident students are not included in the student credit hour calculation. So this is just for students who are residents. It doesn't include non-residents. Those tuition and fees obviously stay with the institutions, but they do not generate weighted student credit hours. As I stated earlier, we have formula budgets and non-formula budgets. So the teaching institutions are the formula funded budgets. All the other institutions are treated similar to how other budgets across the state are treated, in that they are line item budgets. So this would be all of the professional schools, as well as all of the non-formula budgets. So those that are both, within UNLV and UNR, as well as those that are within the system. Those are treated just like other accounts across the state and are not included in the funding formula. Some other factors that are important to point out in the formula. So there are some adjustments that are made within the formula. The first is what we call the small institution factor. So this is for institutions, and in this case, it's WNC and GBC that are smaller. Smaller is defined by institutions with 100,000 or less weighted student credit hours. So to the extent that those institutions are below that 100,000 mark of weighted student credit hours, they receive an additional, in addition to the regular calculation for weighted student credit hours, they receive an additional $30 per weighted student credit hour for those student credit hours below 100,000. And you'll see that as I get into some of the calculations. There's also a research factor. So when I talked about the course weights and courses being weighted 1 or up to 8.8, in the two universities, upper division and graduate courses receive an additional 10%, and that is to recognize their research mission. So where at a community college, you might see an upper division course weighted at a 2, at the universities, a similar course would be rated at a 2.2. So it gets that additional 10% for the research factor. And then the final piece of the funding formula is there is a recognition of research, the need to help fund research facilities at the universities. And so there is a calculation that's included in the formula that for research space, there is a state allocation that is recognized based on the square footage of space that each of the universities has dedicated to research. And so there's an additional component of the formula that adjusts to recognize that research space. The last component of the formula is what we call the performance pool. And so there are a series of metrics that we establish goals for all of the institutions. We just, or not just, but we completed setting the year 9 and 10 targets. And the metrics include things such as degrees awarded. So it would be, bachelor's degrees, associate's degrees, master's and doctoral degrees. It also recognizes certificates. There are factors in the performance pool for graduating minority students. There's factors in the performance pool for graduating Pell eligible students. There's a whole list of factors that add up to a point system that the institutions have to make sure they reach those point goals to receive the funds in the performance pool. And the performance pool, I think is important to point out, is not funded with additional dollars as an incentive. Really what you do is at the end, when you calculate the budgets for the teaching institutions, 20% of that is then taken out of their budgets and placed into the performance pool. And those institutions have to earn that 20% back by meeting these various metrics that I talked about. So next, I just want to walk through some of the formula calculations. The first, of course, is the caseload growth, but this gives you, I think, a good picture of the weighted student credit hours that I was referring to when I was talking about the various components of the formula. And so when we calculate caseload growth, we're always looking back in the past. And so for this, we're looking at fiscal year 20 weighted student credit hours, and primarily because that is the most recent data that we have available. So we look at the fiscal 20 weighted student credit hours there. And if you look at that second column labeled fiscal 20, and you can see at the bottom, it's 3,122,000. So that again represents doing the math of how many student credit hour completions are there times the weight. And that's across obviously all of the institutions. That is then compared to fiscal 18, which is the number that was used when the 2019 legislature approved our budget. We used the fiscal 18 calculation of weighted student credit hours, again, because back then that was the most recent information we have. And so for the calculation of caseload growth, it's the difference between fiscal 20 and fiscal 18. So that, I guess it's the fourth column in labeled weighted student credit hour change. You can see the increases in additional weighted student credit hours when you compare fiscal 20 to fiscal 18. So again, looking at the very bottom in the green bar there, in fiscal 20, we across the system had almost 146,000 more weighted student credit hours. We then take that 145,000 and we multiply it. If you look in the top far right-hand column, you'll see that the rate that we used for fiscal year 21, which is the year that we're in now, was $164.61 per weighted student credit hour. So that is how we do the math to calculate caseload growth for both fiscal year 22 and 23. And so you can see, again, if you look at the bottom right-hand portion of that column, that generates across the system, and you can see the breakdown there by institution, but across the system, 24 million per year in caseload growth funding based on the formula. So next, I just want to talk about some of the other components of the funding formula. And I'm not going to go through each of the calculations on research O&M or small institution factor as I've done in the past, but just wanted to show you what those calculations or what those numbers represent when you look across the system. So these represent all of the decision units, if you will, related to the funding formula. So again, if you start on the left-hand side and sort of work our way right, the first column there, M200 research O&M. So again, that's that portion that I talked about when I talked about the formula components. This represents the additional research space that both universities have brought online since the last biennium. So you can see there in total, if you look at the bottom there of that column, overall it's 704,000, and you can see the breakdown there by institution. So continuing to move right into the M201 column, you see the small institution factor there for GBC, and WNC. And the first thing you'll notice is that those are negative numbers. And so the question always comes up, well, wait a minute, why are they receiving a negative number? And the reason for that is the small institution factor is included in their base. So when you go back and you look at what was approved by the legislature in 2019, and that calculation of the small institution factor, that is rolled into their base budget. Well, because both of those institutions have grown since 2018 as compared to 20, the amount of that small institution factor is then reduced. And so we do that through the M201 decision unit, and you can see the adjustments there. They're still receiving a small institution factor that's included in their base. It's just being reduced to recognize the growth that has occurred in fiscal 20 compared to fiscal 18. Again, still continuing to move right. The next column there, M203, that is that same caseload adjustment that I talked about in the last slide, so I don't need to spend any more time on that. The final column there is the M220 formula redistribution. And so what happens at the end when we make all these various calculations is, again, and this gets back to what I said earlier about the distribution of general fund dollars based on each institution's proportionate share. This is where that adjustment happens. And so what this means, where you look at this and you see UNR with a negative number there, that is because their proportionate share of the total weighted student credit hours has actually gone down in fiscal 20 compared to fiscal 18. So this makes all of those adjustments to ensure that each institution is receiving the same amount per weighted student credit hour based on those fiscal year 20 numbers. And then you have the other adjustments for research and small institution factor that are then added on once you do that final distribution. So that's the funding formula at a very high level, and certainly we can get into more detailed discussions on some of the components of that. But I want to shift now to registration fees. So this table here represents, it shows the registration fees for fiscal year 21, again, the year we're in, and then fiscal year 22 and 23. These fees are established through a program that we call predictable pricing. And so for fiscal 22 and 23, those rates are determined by the Higher Education Price Index. This is a program that the Board of Regents adopted. I believe it's been 2 years now that this has been in place. And so those for fiscal 22 and 23, those are 2.8% increases. And that's based on the Higher Education Price Index that was published in May of 2019. We also are currently publishing in our procedures and guidelines fiscal year 24 as well. And this is to make sure that students understand what their costs are going to be as they matriculate through the system. And so we also have 2024, obviously not part of this biennium, but it is published out there currently. Not included in the predictable pricing model are the professional schools. So the law school and the two medical schools, they are not part of this. There's a different process, a committee process that reviews the tuition and fees that are charged there. And so for UNLV law for 22 and 23, the board has approved a 4% increase per year. For the UNLV School of Medicine, there's a 3% increase per year in 22 and 23. And for the UNR School of Medicine, it's a 2.8% increase per year in 22 and 23. So the next slide is just a slide to give you some context of the value of the registration fees and non-resident tuition when you look at the state operating budget and the changes related to those compared to, again, fiscal 21. So you can see the changes there slightly down overall in 22 compared to 21. And then a slight uptick in 2023. So next I want to go through the capacity enhancements that are included in the governor's recommended budget. So first is, so overall there's 10.9 million per year in capacity enhancement funding that is included in the governor's budget. This is the same amount for fiscal 21. And remember, those of you that were on the committee 2 years ago will remember that this was originally presented as a 4-year program, and then it changed to a 5-year program just because of timing. And so fiscal 23 actually represents year 5 of this program. Now, originally, when we presented this 5-year program, years 4 and 5 were scheduled to see increases in that funding, but due to budget reductions as a result of the pandemic, we have held those capacity enhancement funds at the same level for both fiscal year 22 and 23. We've held them flat, even though we originally presented them as increasing in that 5-year plan. So first up is Nevada State College, which is receiving $900,000 a year. And this is to expand their teaching academy program and statewide efforts to collaborate with their community college partners across the system. Those collaborations range from the provision of Nevada State college courses on community college campuses, such as their teacher pipeline partnerships with WNC and CSN, and their innovative 3+1 programs. And certainly the presidents in the question and answer portion of this can talk in much greater detail about these programs on each of their campuses. Next is the College of Southern Nevada at 5.8 million a year. And again, these are related to workforce initiatives in health science and advanced manufacturing and dual enrollment. CSN is also developing short-term training programs and weekend college options as well. And so that is the high level of the College of Southern Nevada. Great Basin College, $700,000 per year in capacity enhancement funding. And again, these are for workforce programs such as paramedic, human services, substance abuse counseling. This will also allow the GBC nursing program to expand to their Ely location. Truckee Meadows Community College, 2.25 million per year. This will help expand the high demand courses and ensure that full-time students are able to progress through their degree pathways and maximize the facility usage at TMCC. These funds have also allowed them to expand advising and support services to improve student persistence and completion. Next is WNC, which is receiving $300,000 per year in capacity enhancement funds. And these are for their Jumpstart College, Jumpstart Career, and dual credit initiatives, as well as rural nursing and access and retention of underserved student populations. And last, included in the capacity enhancement funding is the Desert Research Institute. And in the governor's budget, they're receiving $1 million per year. And these funds will be used to repair and replace and upgrade lab and field equipment, really to strengthen DRI's research mission in areas of drought forecasting, wildfire risk evaluation, and weather modeling. So that concludes the capacity enhancement portion. Next, I'm going to go into the DRI formula just briefly. So these are the 3 decision units related to the Desert Research Institute's current funding formula. And you can see there are some negative numbers in that funding formula. So the main item there that is driven by their funding formula is M207 there in the middle. And that is tied to, and has been tied to, the number of, or the amount, I should say, of grants and contracts that DRI receives or is projected to receive in 22 and 23. And so there are tiers to that. And the way it works is that from 0 to 25 million in grants and contracts, they receive 12% state funding. As you go from 25 to 30, they receive 7.5%. And then from 30 to 35, they receive 6%. And then above 35, anything above 35, they receive 5%. As you can see there, this is a negative number there. There are other components to the funding formula as well. The inflationary piece, which is adjustments in personnel costs related to their funding formula, and then the O&M adjustment. We did talk 2 years ago about bringing back a new funding formula for the Desert Research Institute. Given the pandemic and the budget reductions, as well as, frankly, a change in leadership at both DRI and at the system office, we did not put forward a new funding formula for the Desert Research Institute. But it is still a priority for DRI and a priority for the system that in the next biennium, we would like to bring back a funding formula that frankly works better for the Desert Research Institute than the current funding formula. The drivers in this one don't make a lot of sense the way it has played out. I think there were good intentions when it was put in place. But we recognize now with the history that we have on this formula that there needs to be some adjustments to it moving forward. A couple of the other items that are included in the governor's recommended budget. The governor's recommended budget continues the Nevada Teach program. You may remember last biennium, this was funded with a $300,000 appropriation. The governor's budget this time includes $150,000 in each year of the biennium to continue this important program. And so look, this is a program that allows students to pursue a teaching license while also earning a STEM degree as well. So next, there's 2 slides here as it relates to non-general fund positions. So there are various decision units throughout the NCHE budget that include new positions. These are all not funded with general funds, so they are registration fees or in some cases federal funds. And so as you look just kind of at each one of those, and some of them are truly cleanup from the last biennium where the institutions received funding, but the legislature didn't approve specific positions. So we're coming back now and asking for the legislature to approve specific positions in each of these categories. And so I don't, Madam Chair, unless you want me to, I don't necessarily need to walk through each one of these. Happy to if you want to. Otherwise, just kind of wanted to give you a general idea of what these are, and maybe during Q&A we can get into more details on these. So there's 2 slides on this. Here's the first section, and then here's the next section. And again, some are new. So, Madam Chair, unless you want me to, I'll move on to the next section, unless you want me to go into
Thank
detail.
you, Mr. Klinger. That's good. You're breaking up just a little bit. Your screen is frozen. We've had the same facial expression for the last 30 seconds or so, but we're hearing your voice really well. So you look good. Don't
Okay.
But and then as far as the CIP type projects that you've got listed on the next couple pages, we really don't need to discuss those. Those will be discussed more deeply at the CIP level. So if you want to go ahead and skip forward to Millennium Scholarship, financial aid programs, WICHE, those types of things, we'll be having those conversations separate from this. So thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. So I will then skip forward to slide 60, which is the financial aid programs. The first item on that list is the Governor Gwen Millennium Scholarship Program. As you know, not in our budget, but certainly a critical scholarship to the Nevada system of higher education. And we are grateful that the governor has included in his budget $44 million to continue that program moving forward into the next biennium. Next, and this item is in our budget, the Silver State Opportunity Grant does include $4.4 million per year. And this is the shared responsibility model grant, if you will, at NCHE. And then lastly, and again, this is in the Treasurer's Office budget, but is critical to NCHE, is the Nevada Promise Scholarship Program, which does include $7.3 million per year. We have also been having conversations with the Treasurer's Office. I know the Treasurer is interested in introducing a bill that would study the various the state-funded scholarship programs across the state. And we certainly are open and would like to collaborate with the Treasurer's Office on those studies. Next is the transfer of WICHE into NCHE. And for those of us that have been around long enough, will remember when WICHE was in NCHE and then was moved out. So this actually moves WICHE back into NCHE. And I think when you look at other states, they are set up similar. And we think there are just synergies here to include WICHE within the Nevada system of higher education, as well as there is an efficiency there as well. We're anticipating that this will save $85,000 over the course of the upcoming biennium. and that, the NC office is very small, and they are currently down to one staff person. So it'll be additional resources from them where we can share resources within our office to help them achieve their mission. Next is the one-shot appropriation for the UNLV School of Medicine. And again, this is not in...
Whoops. Okay, I believe we have lost Mr. Klinger.
Madam Chair, this is Chancellor Rose. I'll text him.
Thank you very much. And we're just about at the end, and he's been talking for almost a solid hour. So I think it's not too bad a spot. So let's give him a moment to get back in. And then I will go ahead and open it up for questions of the committee. He was at the UNLV School of Medicine, which is going to be a separate bill and a separate discussion. So that's fine. So let's give him a moment, committee members, to get back, hopefully. And if not, Chancellor, we can start with some high-level questions. And if you need to phone a friend in one of your presidents, why, I'll give you the opportunity to just play hot potato with the question and toss it to one of your presidents. So, but let's give Mr. Klinger a moment to get back.
Thank you,
He
Madam
worked so
Chair.
hard to get that presentation.
He did, and he's working on getting back into the meeting. Thank you for your patience.
No,
Madam
no
Chair,
problem.
I'm here.
Yay, Mr. Klinger, you're back. Okay.
And
We're just complimenting on you for talking for almost a whole hour and powering through this whole thing. So we are in a pretty good spot. I think the only thing you had left to address was faculty, staff, and the compensation slide, and your mission will be complete.
Okay, and thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. And I'm beginning to wonder why I upgraded my internet, because it apparently didn't help. But that's neither here nor there. So let me just go to that slide real quick. Can you see my screen? I just want to make sure.
This is broadcast. We can't.
You can't. Okay, maybe because I'm not sharing it. Sorry. There we go.
We can see it. This is broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you. You scroll down. I think that's we might be on the last slide, actually, I believe.
I believe so, Mr. Klinger. Slide number 63, please.
Okay, so we talked about this a little bit in the pre-session hearing. The Board of Regents created a task force to look at performance pay for professionals. As those of you prior biennia and have asked for specific funding for performance pay for professionals. And so the request here is, and what the task force recommended was that each institution essentially establish a performance pay pool of at least 1%, and that they do that within the existing resources. So it would be the existing state operating budget plus the other resources that they have on their campus. And so really the ask for the legislature is simply to include language in the Appropriations Act to ensure that we have the flexibility to do that. Unlike prior biennia where we were specifically asking for a line item appropriation hopefully to give us the flexibility within the Appropriations Act and let us attempt to solve our own problem. Now, I have to say, given the pandemic and budget reductions, this was originally scheduled to go into effect for fiscal year 22. Given where the budgets are now and depending on how they come out for 22 and this, just based on the restrictions of funding, but we still do plan to move forward with the recommendations of the task force that the institutions establish a merit pool on each one of their campuses. So with that, Madam Chair, I will stop my screen sharing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Klinger. Good job. We appreciate it. There is a lot here. I always think it's good to get through the whole presentation. That way everything's out there, and then we can start working systematically through the different components of the presentation to allow the committee members to ask questions. So with that, I have a couple of high-level questions that may not necessarily fit into any of these categories. And committee members, there is the Zoom chat that is available, and I believe everyone else knows how to reach me if you do have a question. But please, if I miss you, please ask to be recognized. I want to make sure, this is very complicated, that especially with our newer members, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to dive into this and really understand it. I guess probably one of my high level questions would be, Chancellor, you mentioned debt service of NSHE students. Do we have any idea what the actual debt is being carried across the institutions by the students right now?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Chancellor Rose. Obviously, I don't have those numbers at my fingertips, but we could certainly provide you at the very least with default rates. Those default rates of student debt are collected nationally and reported nationally, and it will give you a sense of how Nevada students are faring with the total cost of attendance and how they're managing that. So I would be very happy to ask my staff to provide you with whatever information we have about debt load and default rates.
That would be very helpful. There's a lot of discussion about this at the national level and here. And I just think we need to really understand, especially what the students have been through and what the system has been through since last March. Operating where the students actually are. They made commitments towards debt, not sure if they were able to continue, where they actually stand. So I think it's an important component for us to make sure that we have in the discussion points on this budget. I believe Ms. Dondero, Senator Dondero Loop had a higher level question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually have two, if I could ask them. The first one is that when we got to slide 55, we talked about those non-general fund positions. And I noticed that for the most part, everybody balanced their budget without cuts to their employees. But UNR actually eliminated, well, they had 41 vacant positions and 9 filled positions. And can you talk a little bit about why UNLV or UNR chose to do that and the other institutions somehow balance their budget without doing that? That's the best I can do to ask that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to you and through to Senator Dondero Loop. I appreciate the question.
And Chancellor, you can go directly to the members today. This needs to be a conversation.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the direction that we provided the campuses, and I think this is a very important component of the system's philosophy, is that while we provided overall framework for managing the cuts, there was direction that there should be strategic decision-making at the campus level based on local conditions. And so if you really dug into those activities to manage the cuts, you would probably see even in the weeds more diversity based on campus situations. I can't speak specifically to UNR's decisions, but I do believe that we have UNR on the line if you would like President Sandoval to answer that specifically.
That would be good. It was just something that I noticed, and that's why I asked.
So, Madam Chair, I don't know about the technological end of this, but I think that the process allows for me to recognize President Sandoval or a member of his team to respond. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think he just has to unmute himself.
Yeah. And good morning, Madam Chair. For the record, Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, to you and through you to Senator Don Darrow Loop. So I have Vic Redding, who's here as well as in head of finance, and in a conversation with him. This situation obviously preceded my arrival at UNR, but I think part of that formula, that decision matrix, had to do with the number of positions that we had filled versus the other campuses. So it may indeed have resulted in the elimination of some positions and keeping some positions frozen. But from campus to campus, it's going to be very different in terms of how those decisions were made.
I appreciate that answer, and great to see you, President.
Thank you, Senator. It's great to see you as well.
My second question, Chair, if I could continue, is just one that sort of popped up this morning, coincidentally, with us hearing this budget. And I understand that, and I thought, of course, according to the morning news, that it was UNR, but I understand after looking, it was actually NSHE in general was going to charge a student surcharge to students due to kind of a COVID surcharge. And I was curious because I know that we've gotten HERF dollars, and I see on many of the slides that they have gone through what those things will go to. And so I was just curious why there was a necessary surcharge if they were receiving those funds. So if you could address that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Don Darrow Loop. Again, for the record, Chancellor Rose. I'll answer half of that question and then yield to Andrew Klinger, because this is an issue that predates my arrival. The only piece that I would offer, of course, for your consideration is that although we are incredibly grateful for the support of the federal government at this difficult time, those dollars have not covered the entire loss that we have experienced. And so there have been difficult decisions. And as you know, our effort is always to hold students harmless through this time. But I hope that CFO Klinger can elaborate on this answer, because he would have been here for those early hard decisions that the Regents faced.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, through the chair to Senator Don Darrow Loop. I think the Chancellor did a great job of answering that question. And I want to point out that the surcharge is only for fiscal year 21. And so the Board of Regents made a decision when we faced additional cuts in 22 and 23 not to extend that surcharge into the upcoming biennium. And I guess I would just reiterate what the Chancellor stated, is that when this decision was made back in the summer of last year, this was one component of sort of a shared sacrifice to balance the NSHE budget at that time. But again, just want to reiterate that surcharge will not continue into the next biennium.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. I just, as I look at the prices of credit per hour, credit fees, I honestly, as a student and as a parent that have paid those fees, I feel like they have just thousands and thousands of percents, increased over the years. And so I'm just cognizant of the fact and sensitive of the fact that, students are trying to do their best and pay their fees. And so if we can use other dollars for that, it would be great. Thank you very much for your answer.
Madam Chair, you're on mute. Thank you very much. So I think one of the overarching questions, and this is a real softball for you all, but I think we should give you the opportunity to make the case of what type of impacts these cuts will actually have to the academics program and basically to student services. So we don't need a long rundown, but if you could just give us a very high level of what impacts you see as we move through some of these budget cuts.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for the record, Chancellor Rose, and I appreciate you. I appreciate your question because it acknowledges, of course, that any cut to our budgets is one that we would rather not experience, but we also know that we're all in this together and that you all have extremely difficult decisions to make across sectors. And I would just say, as a general matter, as you all know, I'm a first generation college student. I very much depended in my own undergraduate experience on small class sizes, on large numbers of advisors and student supports at every level, or I would not have made it through my own degree program. And so, of course, those are the concerns that we have. And every campus has tried to mitigate the direct harm to students. I would have to say that is our collective goal in every instance of cost containment or cut, is to protect the student experience to the very best of our capacity. And what I can say about that is that means there are others who will feel the impact. President Sandoval, for example, just mentioned the positions that go unfilled. That creates bigger workload for remaining faculty and remaining staff. We know we can't recognize good performance with increased salaries at a time when families are struggling. And these are very difficult trade-offs. I mean, I have to say, as your chancellor, that the number one thing I worry about heading into this next biennium is the news that we are all reading nationally. As we're preparing for enrollment for next fall, the early preliminary national data are suggesting to us that some of our most vulnerable students, the students who are underrepresented, first generation, are the ones that are the most anxious about jumping back into higher education. And so, we've made so much progress with these vulnerable students and closing achievement gaps. And so from my perspective, I am quite concerned about how we continue to grow our supports for those students. So that is where we need to be as a system, as our student bodies increasingly diversify and come to us with new needs. And the last point I'll make on this score, and there may be others who wish to chime in, is we know that there are going to be lasting impacts of the pandemic and the economic downturn. So even if we, look something close to normal in the fall in terms of greater percentage of classes face-to-face, the ongoing impact to mental health is one that I have great concern about. The ongoing impact to family budgets will continue for some time. And so I do have concerns about our ability to continue to make progress and good progress that has been demonstrated in the slides that I showed you this morning. So thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair. If you'd like more detailed answers about the tough trade-offs that our campuses are making, of course, I'd be happy to yield to the president.
Chancellor, I think you've made a very good case, but I would not want to cut off any one of the presidents. If any of them would like to make a brief statement, knowing that we understand the position you're in because we know the position the state is in. So.
It looks to me like President Helgerson might like to chime in.
President Helgerson, go ahead, please.
Hi, President Hilgersum. For the record, first I want to say that at Truckee Meadows Community College, we have made cuts. We have made cuts through leaving numerous positions frozen. We've not hired them back. It has increased workload. People are wearing multiple hats. We also issued an equivalent of 5.5 notices of non-renewal, which means that an equivalent of 5.5 employees at every level of the organization will be out of a job starting July 1. And so this has been a very difficult year. I'm very proud of faculty and staff at TMCC. They've done a marvelous job getting students through this pandemic and really trying hard to always consider students first, and especially as it relates to student success. I'm very concerned that now that we're finally making gains on student success and weighted student credit hours completed, that we're going to have to roll it back. And I'm very worried about that because, you know, this is difficult stuff, public higher education at the two-year college level. I'm also concerned that our workforce training programs are underfunded. I'm concerned that our transfer programs are also struggling as a result of the pandemic. So of course, I also agree that as state agents, we all need to share the burden of revenue loss. I get it. But I think it's not safe to assume that we have gone through the last year unscathed, because that's just not an accurate picture of what's been happening at TMCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. I have President Whitfield next.
Thank you, Chairwoman. And for the record, this is Keith Whitfield from President of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Good morning. Let me just add to that discussion of that the way in which we've been managing these cuts is that they will continue to deplete our reserves, and that is very disconcerting. I think that we have in years past been able to actually survive and do very well by having generated a reasonable amount of reserves, and that allows us to be able to grow. As a newly minted Research One institution, it's very important for us to grow in some very strategic areas, which include medicine, engineering, the sciences, and the liberal arts. And so this will greatly impair our ability to be able to move on a continued path of growth. It also slows down our ability to do one of the ENSHI goals, which is to increase our advisor ratio. One of the critical things to student success, which is one of the things here at UNLV that we're laser focused on, is improving our student success, our graduation rate. And one of the key factors in being able to do that is having advisors. It's been shown nationally. It's one of the best practices that gets used consistently. And that was something that we were very interested and anxious to be able to try to grow in the very near future. And that will, the cuts are going to severely decrease our ability to be able to do that, but it's still one of our priorities. And then lastly, I would just say that one of the things that I think that we struggle with as a state is to be able to try to increase the college going rate, and being able to have sufficient faculty in those classes doing an outstanding job of providing an education for our students is critically necessary. So all of these things work, I think, in concert to be able to limit our abilities to be able to do some of the things that the state needs to be able to do as we bounce back from the COVID pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Whitfield. I believe I have President Sandoval next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brian Sandoval, President of the University of Nevada, Reno, and to the members of the committee. I suppose I will adopt by reference the remarks of President Whitfield, my colleague and friend. But for our campus, it's going to be very, very difficult as well. We are looking at 100 plus frozen positions, which will include 25 to 30 faculty positions. It will also include, which concerns me very much, student advisement and student support positions. So, you know, it will indeed have an effect on our mission moving forward. I will say that I'm very proud of our students, faculty, and staff. They've worked very hard. They've been very resilient. The other issue that I'd like to bring to your attention, I guess separate from the state support, is the reduction in enrollment, which is going to affect us as well. From fall to fall, we're down approximately 1,000 students, and obviously that's going to have a ripple effect as well. But we will, as the Chancellor said, we understand that we need to have shared sacrifice. We want to work with you, but it is indeed going to make a mark on us. And I meet and speak with our faculty and students and staff on a daily basis, and they're doing all they can, and they know that they're doing more than their share in order to continue our mission. But I know as well as anybody that this is a difficult time, and that we're going to work through this, but it will be difficult for our campus. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you, President Sandoval. And I have President Solis next.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. Vince Solis at Western for the record. Wanted to echo some of the similar comments that my colleagues had made. Madam Chair, the cuts for us at Western, we have made cuts in positions similar to some of our other institutions, and it has impacted us as the smallest institution within the system. Our team members are carrying much heavier loads in terms of work, and we've had to also freeze positions all at a time when our student demographics continue to change dramatically in terms of serving first year and minority students. So those have created significant challenges, but to what President Sandoval said earlier, we're also anticipating less enrollment in the fall, and that will translate to more budget challenges moving forward. So I just wanted to echo some of the similar comments that my colleagues had made. Thank you so much.
And thank you all very much for keeping it high level and keeping us informed on what you're looking at over this next interim. So with that, I think I'm going to go to Senator Ratty had a question. We'll start there.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I think looking for a high-level response to this question, I think one of the things that you're going to wrestle with, that we are also wrestling with, is the potential second or additional round of stimulus that's being discussed at the national level, and the timing of that stimulus, and recognizing sometimes our governance structures are not particularly nimble, especially for dollars that come in at the last minute. So just wondering, Chancellor, how you're thinking about preparing for how you would prioritize if additional money comes from the federal government to backfill some of these challenges.
Thank you, Senator Addy. Again, for the record, Chancellor Rose, I appreciate that question very much. And of course, we are eagerly anticipating additional federal dollars, as we all are, of course. And I've been in conversation within the past few weeks with the governor's office about some, perhaps some guidance around how they hope that we will be using the future dollars. And I know that CFO Klinger has met with the business officers from all of our campuses to begin to build out a framework so that we can think about what is the highest and best use of these dollars as a whole system, and anticipate those dollars and be strategic about them. So I think the kinds of things that you can see from us as we begin to craft a strategic framework for receiving that money. Obviously, there's the money that goes directly to students, and for that, we're really grateful because we know that they are suffering, and we're glad for that money. But the dollars that go directly into the institutions will all be monitored for compliance with a set of strategic objectives. And given the moment that we're in, I think you can anticipate that we will be focused on those kinds of activities that assist with workforce, that help us build back our state's economy in the way that only higher education can do. And I'm also aware that there may be some in that package, future package, there may be some one-time dollars that we might be able to use very strategically for infrastructure that would then serve us well beyond this next fiscal year. So, how do we use those dollars in a way that will have multiplier effect and that will serve the state's interests, particularly around workforce and economic diversification going forward. So that might give you a sense of the kinds of things that we will be prioritizing as a team. And of course, working in close conversation with the governor's office and with all of you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And I believe we have Ms. Howdigy next.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I just have some questions regarding the budget reductions. Nice to see you, Chancellor Rose, and thank you for the presentation. I think I know the answer to this, but I don't want to make any assumptions, so I'm going to ask. But how were the distribution of reductions decided? Because I noticed that all of the institutions, with the exception of Great Basin College and Nevada State College, had reductions from general fund appropriation.
So thank you for the question, Vice Chair. I would actually prefer to yield this question to Andrew Klinger, who managed that process directly with all of the business officers.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, through Chair Carlton to Assemblywoman Howdigy. So that process was a decision made by the Board of Regents, and what we attempted to do and actually did was to spread those reductions across all of the institutions. But when we did the calculations, we did not include the capacity enhancement funds. So when we calculated 12%, we took those off the table when we did those calculations. And where you'll see some differences in the numbers is in particular at the universities, because they have the flexibility between their non-formula accounts, if you will, to spread those cuts disproportionately within their total target. So their total target was calculated based on 12%, just like the other institutions, but they have some flexibility there. And specifically on GBC, and I'd have to look at the slides, there should represent their proportionate share calculated without the capacity enhancement included in that calculation.
Okay, so the follow-up, Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
So the capacity enhancement for Nevada State College is what sent it to 13% increase in general fund appropriations as opposed to a reduction.
So part of what, I guess part of what changes the, because I'm assuming you're looking at the overall changes in appropriations, and part of what factors into that is the caseload growth as well. So the 12% cuts are taken, and then caseload growth is added back. So it makes the numbers come out a little bit different. I think that's probably what you're looking at.
Okay, and that's what I was assuming, that there was caseload growth for Great Basin College and Nevada State College, because I saw that there was. Can you explain a little bit what caused that caseload growth at those two institutions?
So if I go back and look at, and I don't want to share my screen for fear of screwing it up here, but so all of the institutions receive some level of caseload growth, and I think it has to do with maybe their proportionate share of caseload growth as you look at it, because again, if you go back to, it's slide 43 in the slide deck that shows the calculation of caseload growth. And again, it's based on the number of weighted student credit hours in fiscal 20 compared to fiscal 18. So it's just the change in that weighted student credit hours. And at the end of the day, that impacts their proportionate share of funding overall once you run it through the formula. I hope that answers your question.
It did, Mr. Klinger, thank you. And then, Madam Chair, just last questions on the budget reductions?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to kind of follow up on what my colleague, Senator Dondero Loop, asked regarding the budgets for the institutions. I also had the same question with UNR on why they chose to eliminate the 41 vacant positions as opposed to holding them vacant. But in addition to that, I saw that they were the only institution that also had budget reductions to retirement. Could you explain what that is? What kind of retirement reductions were made? Is that retirement benefits or?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Again, Melody Rose for the record. And I would ask Andrew Klinger if he could field this question and if we need them to bring in the UNR team as well for support.
Yeah, for the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, through Chair Carlton to Assemblywoman Howdy. I don't think it's a reduction in benefits, and I would actually defer to UNR on that. I'm assuming it is maybe positions retiring, but I'm not positive on that. So I would defer to UNR on that.
And Madam Chair, if I may, Brian Sandoval, President of University of Nevada, Reno, for the record. Speaking with Vic Redding, our Director, our Vice President of Finance, we did not make any changes to retirement benefits for individuals on campus, but we'd be happy to work with your staff to provide any more details.
Thank you, President Sandoval. I was just curious because I know that the budget reductions focused on elimination of positions, operating expenses, and then there was a category that said retirement. So I'm curious as to what kind of reductions to retirements there was. And then my last question, Madam Chair, was I saw in UNLV's budget reductions that they're also utilizing $10 million of investment income for distribution to kind of offset the reductions. Can you explain, Mr. Klinger, this is probably a question for you, what investment income is to me?
Sure, Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, to Assemblywoman Howdy. So during the fiscal year 21 budget reductions, we did what we call two special allocations from our investment earning pool. So, and maybe just to give you a little bit of background on this. So what we do is we pool all of the cash from all of the institutions. And so this is the operating pool essentially. And the balance in that pool varies depending on the day. If you're making if it's payday, then the pool is going to go down. If you're collecting registration fees, the pool is going to go up. And we divide that pool essentially into three tranches. There's a long-term piece of that pool, a medium-term piece of that pool, and a short-term piece. And the long-term piece is actually invested in equities. The medium-term piece of that is invested in medium-term bonds. And then the short-term is short-term bonds and short-term cash. And so we have earnings on that pool that normally we do distributions monthly to the campuses at a rate of 2.75% of their balance. And so what had happened is two things. The Regents had created a $50 million market fluctuation account where we had earnings above that normal rate of distribution that were set aside in that market fluctuation account. In addition to that, we had earnings that had built up that had not been distributed to the campuses of approximately $70 million. And again, this goes back to the summer of last year. And so as part of the budget balancing mechanisms for fiscal 21, we distributed both that 50 million market fluctuation reserve to the campuses, as well as the earnings in that pool, the other 70 million that were in excess of distributions. We distributed all of those back to the campuses. And the way those funds are distributed back to the campuses, they're based on each campus's proportionate share in the pool. So they're not distributed based on the need for budget reductions. They're distributed based on each campus's balance. And so in the case of UNLV, they had distributions of those investment earnings beyond what they needed to offset state cuts with in fiscal 21. So they have some of those funds still available that they can offset additional cuts with. I know that's a long explanation to your question, but I hope it answers it.
No, it does. It does. Thank you, Mr. Klinger. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have more questions, but I should thank you for indulging those. And if there's time, then maybe you can come back to me for a second round.
That's fine. Thank you, Ms. Howgie. And we know everyone's going to have a lot of questions, so we do appreciate that. I think I need to go back and probably wrap up the discussion about the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. There was a couple of components of that didn't quite get addressed. How much of that was used for student aid?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I would recommend I yield to Andrew Klinger on that, again, who manages those distributions.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. So if you look at slide 37, Madam Chair, there's a breakdown there of the total award, and then the minimum amount is the next column that is required under the Act to be distributed to students as aid. And so, and it's the same amount that was required under the CARES Act. So under the CARES Act, 29.9 million was directed for student aid, and under what we call HERF2 funding, the same amount is required to go to students as direct aid. Now, I will point out that if you look at slide 38, in addition to that 29.9 million, the institutions out of their portion have identified an additional 8.6 million that will go to students in direct aid.
So that's the good history on that. And so you're saying that the next component of aid that will come through will be distributed along the same lines as this.
This is for, Madam Chair, for the record, Andrew Klinger, the funds that you're seeing here, these are the funds that were approved in December of last year. Any additional future funds, I'm not sure how those will be broken out yet. So if you're asking about the sort of the next round, the third round of funding, I'm not sure what the student aid portion of that will be.
Okay, I think we're going to want an answer to that question for sure.
Yeah.
So that we understand what's going to happen. We've seen what you've done in the past, but I need to have a good idea of what your plans are in the future. And if I could ask, when I was looking at the numbers of the breakdown, UNLV, UNR, CSN, it's the anticipated allocation that's going. I'm not talking about past, I'm talking about future now. So the anticipated allocation that's going to be going there would be a total of about 33 million to CSN. Would it be possible to get a breakdown by individual school in CSN on that so we could get a better picture of where those dollars are going?
Madam Chair, for the record, CFO Klinger, we can get you that information, and I will also say we have on slide 38 where I provided the summary, we have the breakdown of that by institution that we can share as well.
Now, is that future funds or past funds?
Past
Those
funds,
are
sorry. Yeah, past
those
funds.
are past.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm talking about future.
Okay, and
Okay, so I'm talking about round 2.
And Madam Chair, I'll work with the business officers from the institutions, and we can get you that information.
Okay, because it's good to see where you've been, but I also want to know the plan on where you think you might be going so that we can compare the two. That I believe that would be very helpful. I know Majority Leader had some questions on the performance pool. So let's go ahead and skip to the performance pool and get those questions answered. And then I know some folks have questions about weighted student credit hours also. We'll go back to that in just a moment. But Majority Leader, you had a couple of questions? I believe you might be muted, Majority Leader.
I was, as a matter of fact. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I apologized by saying sorry for the up and downs. I was grabbing my budgets from the previous years in the notes, just so I can make sure I was holding information accurately in my head. And so on the performance pool, this is typically an issue that I like to ask questions about. And so I guess I'll start by asking if there's been, I'm sorry, not the performance pool, not the performance pay. I want to make sure that I'm on a performance pool. So I guess I'll start by saying, has there been recent conversation by the Board of Regents about any changes either in the specific items or the weights regarded to the performance pool?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Chancellor Rose, to you, and of course through you to the Majority Leader. I would ask CFO Klinger to handle this question because he's got the history of that conversation, which I did not live through. So if I may yield to him.
Thanks, Dr. Rose. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. So we have not had a discussion at the board or among staff about changing the weighted factors. What we have done though, so year 8, which is fiscal year 20, we do have the final outcomes. And if you look at those, you'll see, depending on the campus, there are some, some that are close and then some that are not so close. And so when we set the performance targets for years 9 and 10, what we did is we reset all of those targets based on their year 8 actual. So we went through and reset all of those targets so that you don't see, in some cases you see that institutions are 200% above their target. So for years 9 and 10, we actually went back and reset those targets. And I don't know if that's what you're asking.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Klinger. So that's helpful. And I think I am holding the 1920 year 8 outcomes here. And of course, since 2013, every institution has, except for 2 schools in year 13, but really 2014, nearly forward, every single school has been well over 100%. And we really want these dollars to be meaningful, right? Measure things that you value and value what you measure. As I look back at the distributions among the schools, they might change by a little, but they're really remaining flat. They're remaining flat across the institutions and the percent of funding that they get. And I think especially since I hear the conversation from Chancellor Rose talking about the need to, gear the system to help economic development, we have metrics within that performance pool around economic development, around 1 to 2 year certificates. And so I guess I'm just wondering, when it comes to those factors and there's those weights, they're static and they've been static for a long time. And it's a big chunk of money. I know that you said it's, dollars that are already built in and the institutions are competing to get the dollars. But at the same time, I think it's lost. If everyone just gets it and they get the same amount, I think it might have lost the intent of what it was intended to do, which was, push each institution further along year over year in trying to, make these targets more of a, something that isn't just going to be, I think we're taking it for granted is what I'm saying. And so I would be interested in further conversations about how we could make this more meaningful, or how we want to adjust these factors and these weights to reflect what we need in this upcoming biennium. And then, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I know I had another question, but it was on the performance pay, but I can't recall, I can wait. And I know you wanted to talk about weighted student credit hours, so I can wait to talk about the other piece later.
No, Majority Leader, please go ahead and address performance pay while we're here. There, we've got a lot of questions, so I'm sure we'll get to them all. Go ahead.
Okay, get me done with, right? Get me off the platform. So this is really more of a comment than anything else, because I'm really appreciative of the fact that as a system, you folks have been talking about the performance merit pay. There's been a lot of finger pointing back and forth, and I think justifiably so, about whose responsibility is it to make sure that that when we talk about pay equity in the NSHE system, that it's being funded and being considered. So I think we're taking a big step towards getting there. My one recommendation that I would like to see considered is, as we look at that, potentially that back language being placed in, is that when we look at the salary compression issue, and when we look at the NSHE salary study that was produced a couple years back, you know, the biggest issue tends to be around the classified and administrative faculty and their pay. And then when you get to administrators, deans, and executives above. And so I would just think that it would make sense that while you're addressing the salary compression, at least for the first, at least this biennium, the only thing I can control this biennium, that we look at language that would focus on the classified and administrative faculty versus the deans, executives, and above. And that might actually help us exponentially address those particular set of salaries where we seem to be the most where they seem to be the most stuck. Yes.
Chair Carlton, if I may address that for the record, Melody Rose, Chancellor, I really appreciate your observations, Majority Leader. I, having spent my whole career in higher education, much of it on the faculty side, I can tell you that issue of salary compression is pernicious, right? It holds on without a strategy to deal with it. It becomes very, very difficult to deal with, both with administrative and instructional faculty. And so I very much appreciate your counsel to us on that. You don't want to have a whole group of employees who are so critical to the mission effectively stuck in place. And when we think about the kind of levers that we have to improve student outcomes, so much of those levers are held by those very individuals that you've just mentioned. And so I really appreciate that. I did also want to, if I may, go back to your previous observation about the performance pool and its, whether it continues to have meaning and whether it needs to be reconsidered. And I just wanted to sort of take a step back and offer you a little bit about my own thinking about where we are as an organization. And again, I'm coming in new and seeing things afresh, which I think I hope is valuable. And it's clear to me that we are poised for a very meaningful, significant, comprehensive strategic planning process. And the observations that you've shared here and other observations I've heard from some of your colleagues throughout the Capitol all point to the fact that, we're going to be anticipating a post-pandemic world. So what should higher education look like in a post-pandemic world? And to me, it's an enormous opportunity. Of course, there are challenges, but I see the opportunity in this moment to ask ourselves, where do we need to be as a state? And are all of our funding mechanisms, are all of our policies, all of our initiatives lined up to move us in those directions? And, because of the pandemic, I think all of higher ed should be asking itself these very questions. And so just know that I'm having a conversation, of course, with all of our stakeholder groups about launching a very inclusive, thoughtful, strategic planning process that brings everybody to the table to agree on where we are going and what we need to get us there. So I think some of the things you've pointed out to us today, I understand, and I think they would fit very nicely within that higher strategic planning conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. I think I'd like to go to the weighted student credit hours right now. And I know that we have a number of new members on this committee, and this is a very complicated formula, and I've done it a couple of times, and I still have to sit down with the yellow pad and pencil and try to figure out, okay, what exactly is this doing? So when I look at the weighted student credit hours, and Mr. Klinger will be familiar with my concerns. It's just it's a constant growth. It's exponential. It doesn't seem to ever flatten out. And especially this year with the pandemic and the changes in education and how students accessed education, for the weights to still go up, I think I'm just having a hard time with that. We've seen so many other budgets through this cycle basically say, okay, hold us harmless, keep us flat, and we can move forward. But with weighted student credit hours, we're still increasing. And I just have some concerns about that. And I guess I want to give you the opportunity to make your case on why weighted student credit hours are going up when we know the issues that are facing the students trying to access education right now. And believe me, we hear from them that they are paying full fare for an education while they're sitting in their parents' basement or living room. So I think you need to keep that in the back of your mind also.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Melody Rose, Chancellor. I'll give you again the high level component of this and then yield to Andrew Klinger, who is masterful with our funding formula in a way that I will probably never be. I would say a couple of things about that. First of all, just the sensitivity to our students. I absolutely share that concern, right? I'm a mother of 4, 2 of them are in college currently. So I'm also a consumer of college educations and having the same conversations around the dinner table. So I share that worry. As I understand it, of course, these weighted student credit hours and the increase that you see there really reflect our growth over the past 2 years. So any pullback in enrollment that we might experience in the fall, and you heard several of the presidents indicate their concerns about some warning signs about fall enrollment, aren't going to be reflected there in that calculation. So we are trying to acknowledge that there has been growth in our classrooms over the past 2 years, and we understand that every student that we add is a great achievement for the state, but he or she also has impact on the classroom and every aspect of support services on campus. And so we are trying to make sure that we are reflecting all of the scaffolding that's necessary. It's instruction, but as I like to say, every single person who works on a college campus is delivering education. So the people that are cleaning the classrooms to the people who are teaching in the classrooms, we need to take care of all of them to make sure that we're serving our mission. So Andrew may have more to say about the specifics of that calculation, but of course we're reflecting an increase over the look back period.
And if I may, Mr. Klinger, so I'll just put my concern right on the table so you can address it. We won't dance around it. Your multiplier addresses the cost of labs and a lot of equipment, space. We'll get to O&M and all of that later on, but here's the thing. They're not going to labs. I know you still have to maintain it at a certain level, but if students aren't actually accessing those labs, we're still increasing the cost. And I understand it's a look back, but it's a 2-year look back. So you've just got 1 year of that. You've got a year where they sat dormant. So that's my concern.
Well,
Yeah.
and before Andrew, before you jump in, Madam Chair, again, thank you for the question. And one thing I think is important to clarify about instruction during COVID, we've got about 80 or 85% of our classes online across the system. And I think that's the point that you're trying to make, and very much appreciate that. But what's so critical to know is that 15 or 20% that are continuing to meet in person are the lab related courses. So they're the things that simply cannot be delivered online, where that infrastructure that you're pointing to is actually still in use. And I appreciate that question very much, and we'll ask Andrew to fill in where I've left off.
Thank you, Mr. Klinger.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer. And so I think the Chancellor did a great job of answering that. And I think part of it, and you know this, obviously, so is that, the 20, for fiscal 20, when we calculate those weighted student credit hours, I mean, that was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I imagine if you looked at weighted student credit hours for the current fiscal year, which we won't know until June, I wouldn't be surprised if in some cases those numbers were negative on the campuses. So it's a matter of the timing of the look back, I expect. And the other thing I would add is that, as you know as well, 82% of our state operating budget is personnel, which regardless of whether it's online or in person, you still need that personnel. And then as the Chancellor stated, the labs are still open, so they still do need the funding for those labs.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Klinger. And I think what you're hearing, just from me, I won't speak for anybody else on the committee, is that, we're looking at a very, very tight budget schedule, and I'm looking at a weighted student credit hour that if we redid the calculation, it would be a different number for next year. And there's a possible savings there that I would like to be able to analyze and be able to wrap my arms around. So I'll be asking fiscal staff to work with you to just get an idea of where we really are. We've always done this in the future. I mean, we've had to look back and then gone forward, but the state's not been in a position that it is right now, as far as every dollar in that first year and second year are very, very precious. So to put money towards something where, as you just stated, those weighted student credit hours could actually go the other way, just gives me a little bit of concern. And I just want to make sure we have all the information that we need to be able to address where these numbers actually need to be. And you may have provided this to staff, and they get down to the paperclip, and they don't always share that paperclip level with us. But the multipliers, I think especially for the new members of the committee, I want to make sure that they understand how these multipliers work. So if whatever documents you have that you could provide to Mr. Casera or Mr. Leiser or Mr. Hartz, whoever you're working with, on actually how you adjust those weights to get a little bit better feel, I'd like that information available to the committee as we move forward. And thank you very much for answering the questions for me. Committee members, is there anyone else who has a particular question on weighted student credit hours, especially our newer members? If you have a question, please ask.
I have a question, Senator Ganser.
Yes, Senator Ganser, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In talking about the weighted student credit hours, first of all, I think it's a good thing that they're going up. That means we have more students who are attending college. And when unemployment rises, individuals tend to go back, and so they get retooled, right? So our community colleges, the four-year institutions will see a rise in enrollment. So I thought what might be helpful is a couple of things. One is to get a look back a little further and going back to sort of the recession era, and you can see how there was a rise in credit hours at that time. And then sort of, so we can kind of compare that to what's happening now. And I would agree there's probably a fall off because of COVID. So we may want to look at semester to semester over the last year, I guess it'd be about a year, because I think what you'll see is that the system may have had more students in the fall, but then it probably weakened during the spring because they were probably hopeful that we would be, the university would be fully on or in person, but they're still online. But there might be an increase this coming fall. So as vaccinations roll out, I would imagine that enrollment will return. So I'm a little wary about reducing funding if the state starts to open up more and the campuses are able to do in-person instruction. So again, if we were to look at 3 semesters to kind of see maybe what the trend is and what the expectation is for the fall, that might be helpful. Because again, I know they have so many fixed costs, and the concern is that we cut them even more when we may be able to anticipate that the enrollment's going to be returning. So those two snapshots, going back to recession and how it increased, and then maybe 3 semesters with an anticipation of what's going to happen in fall of 21. Thanks.
And just to clarify, Senator, you're just looking at credit hours. You're not looking at weighted student credit hours. You're just looking at credit hours in general, how they increased during the recession.
I think either way it will work. Because the weights are really around the type of programs that we wanted to make sure, or we wanted to encourage students to take, and we want to make sure we have the support, and they're also more expensive. So when you look at like STEM education, it's more expensive. So I think if we look at credit hours, that probably would work fine, because this formula wasn't in place until I think it was probably 13. Now that I'm thinking about it.
It was 13. So
yeah, credit hours, that might be helpful. And just one other comment on the performance pool. So I was on the committee for the performance pool. I believe Senator Keffer was on there. I'm not sure who else, but it ended up, we were trying to incentivize certain types of support systems for students. And I think it's been working, but because it's a deduction from sort of what used to be their base, we have to be really careful with that. It's never been an add. Like typically when you see performance incentives, it's an addition to a base. In our case, it was a growing portion of their existing base. So maybe it's time to review that. But it was set up sort of from a base, not an add. So a deduction, not a potential deduction, not an addition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Any comments on weighted student credit hours as we move forward?
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. And this is just, again, I wasn't here in this committee last session or when the funding formula was created, so I just have a few questions. But is this the most equitable way to distribute the dollars? Because I was looking and it looks like there's been higher enrollment, or enrollment's been growing at some of the smaller colleges, but because of the way the weights are distributed for the credit hours, they might, although they're experiencing higher enrollment, they might be getting less in general fund appropriations because their credit hours are weighted less.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Majority Leader, for the question. Again, Melody Rose for the record, and I'll just give the high-level answer, which is that there are a couple of different variables at play here. One is just growth. So you can see, if you look, and I don't recall the slide number at this point, but if you look at the slide deck, you'll see that Nevada State College, for example, has been at a very steep increase year over year in terms of its enrollment. That's what you'd expect to see in a new college, and they've definitely delivered on that. So, there's the growth calculation itself, but then separate from that is the weighting for different kinds of programs. And I think that if I understood her correctly, I think this is where Senator Gansert was making her point about the kinds of things within our portfolio of academic programs that we try to incentivize because they are areas where the state needs to fund in order to get the results that we need, or because there are high cost programming. And those can be things, like your HVAC and your engineering programs. So I think there are two variables at play here, and you're seeing the combination of those rolled up into the outcome. And I think that might be the reason for what you're describing as something that on balance appears inequitable, but once you dig into the various components of the formula, you can see how we get there. And I don't know if CFO Klinger has further refinement to offer.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Rose. For the record, Andrew Klinger, Chief Financial Officer, to Assemblywoman Howdigy. And I think, Assemblywoman, what you're getting to is the question of, when you look at the universities as an example, and you look at lower division courses in, liberal arts, math, social sciences, those courses are weighted a 1. But if you're looking at the science cluster, for example, in the universities, they're weighted at a 2. So I think your question is the relativeness of those weights. Is that accurate? And so when the formula was put in place, those weights were determined by looking at cost studies that had been done in other states and establishing those relative weights to each other based on those other studies. So it was what we call a cost informed calculation. We didn't do our own cost study for, just the time and expense of doing a cost study. So it was cost informed. So the weights are one component of it. And I think the Chancellor hit on this a little bit as well. The other component of this is part-time versus full-time. So if you have a part-time student who's taking less student credit hours, that's going to have an impact as well. And when you look at there's a slide in there that compares the universities part-time to community colleges part-time. And there's a major difference between the two that has an impact on the funding formula as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chancellor Rose and Mr. Klinger. That was helpful.
And thank you very much, Ms. Howdigy. So committee members, we knew this was going to be a long discussion, and that's why we have a rollover for this particular item. We've had the Chancellor, the President's Mr. Klinger with us for 2.5 hours going over everything. We do have some folks in the queue for public comment. The Senate does not have floor, but the Assembly does. So I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance and time and attention. This morning, I believe we're going to go ahead and put a pause here. I think it's a good stopping point to allow people to digest this even further, ask more questions, and come prepared at the next meeting to continue the conversation on the items that are still listed for us to discuss. So, Chancellor, do you have any closing comments before I open it up for public comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Melody Rose, Chancellor of the Nevada System of Higher Education. I just want to thank all of you for your deep consideration of our proposal today and for the dialogue. I think it's been a very helpful conversation as again, your new Chancellor. It's always helpful for me to hear what's on your mind, hear what your ambitions are for our system and how we can make it better. And we are looking forward to working with you through this process. Obviously, we are passionate about what we do and we want to continue to deliver on our promises and on your investment and look forward to doing that collaboratively with you and welcome any further follow-up questions that you may have, and we'll get back to you those things we've already committed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And thank you very much, Chancellor. So with that, committee members, we will take this up again at our next scheduled time. So please review this, go through it. If you have any questions, please reach out. With that, if I could ask broadcast services to give us a moment. It is now exactly 10:30. We're on time. We'll give it a moment or so. I know we have some folks queued up for public comment. Please, public commenters, remember that you do have a time limit of 2 minutes. So with that, we'll give it a moment and then we'll start queuing up public comment. So with that, broadcast services, if you could go ahead and queue up the first person for public comment, please.
This is Michael from Broadcast. I will queue up the first caller. Caller with the last 3 digits, 653. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits, 653. Press *6 to unmute.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dora Martinez, and I represent the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. I just want to say thank you to President Sandoval and President of the TMCC because of their compassionate staff at TMCC, at the DRC Disability Resource Center. I am blind or visually impaired, but I'm totally blind. The staff at the DRC at the MCC was able to accommodate my needs. His name is Thomas Kearns. Awesome staff. And that UNR, I know that with President Sandoval is on board, it's going to do well. So thank you so much. And Madam Chair, I just want to say thank you for the accessible website so far. I'm able to follow with you all on Nellis. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to know that people are able to participate. So with that, Broadcast Services, next person, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 750. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Amy Payson, AMY-PASON, and I'm the Faculty Senate Chair at the University of Nevada, Reno. I submitted written comments already, but I wanted to just underscore some of the comments that have been made during this hearing today. There were a lot of questions just in terms of why our university have been choosing to freeze positions or potentially to cut positions in the face of these budget cuts. And I want to just underscore that we don't really have much options when we have a budget cut, when a lot of our budget goes to the faculty and to the staff that are serving our students, who are developing programs, and who are continuing our educational mission. And I just want to underscore that these are hard decisions, as all of our presidents have said, but when we're asked to make budget cuts, the only place that we can cut is just to reduce our workforce, which, as you've also heard, increases the workload and reduces what we can do for our students. There'll be many initiatives that we were trying to do that will now be put on hold. There were many aspirations that we have, say increasing the diversity of our faculty to better serve our diverse students, that we now will have to put on hold as we wait for the budget to increase where we might be able to hire in these positions again. So there are trade-offs when we think about the budget cuts now and the long-term impacts on what we can do for the state. I know all of my faculty are dedicated, and I know we're all going to work hard and do the best that we can, but our time and our effort is what you're paying for. And I hope that you appreciate those and think about these trade-offs as you make the hard decisions about our budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 184. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Proffitt, spelled Jeff, last name's Proffitt. I'm the business manager of Sheet Metal Local 88 here in Las Vegas. I'm also the chairman of our apprenticeship program. And one thing that I wanted to put on your guys' radar for consideration is the excess credit fees. As a whole, I think that I don't think any student in Nevada or anywhere else for that matter should be, charged more for doing more. And in our case specifically here at our apprenticeship program, and not just our apprenticeship program, but many of the building trades apprenticeship programs, both here in the South and in the North, our apprentices are being charged excess credit fees when we encourage them as a committee to go on and get their associate's degree, get their bachelor's degree, and we actually pay for that through our apprenticeship program. We fund those things. So when they do go on and do those extra things, they're being charged excess credit fees. So I would like to, I'd work with anybody to, to make the process better, or just outright eliminate excess credit fees in the state of Nevada, which I think is the best option. So as you go through your budget process, and through this legislative session, I hope that you would look at the excess credit fees, and I would thank you for the time, Madam Chairman.
And thank you, Mr. Prophet. The next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 650. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Maria Shellhase, Schellhase, and I'm the Faculty Senate Chair at the College of Southern Nevada. The governor's 12% budget cut to higher education will make it impossible to fulfill our mission to put students first, which includes improving student enrollment, retention, completion, and workforce development. CSN's Budget Reduction Committee has determined that the governor's budget cuts will decrease course offerings and increase graduation timelines, increase class sizes and decrease student retention, limit student advising, mentorship programs, tutoring service, and very likely slow student progress, and reduce faculty recruitment and retention, and very likely reduce the number and frequency of classes. While a federal relief package may improve the original budget forecast, the additional funds will not entirely address the 12% state budget reduction. Please consider how these proposed cuts will affect institutional operations and in-state goals. Finally, as you analyze potential solutions to address this problem, please consider that in one semester, 4 full-time faculty members, that's 29% of full-time faculty in my department, passed away. Before, I thought I understood the value of employee benefits, but these deaths have made me realize how affordable and quality healthcare benefits can improve our quality of life. Having affordable and quality benefits, healthcare benefits, may be the difference between life or death. Increased deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums should be reversed, and the elimination of the long-term disability insurance should be restored. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your service.
Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 838. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Vicki Rosser, VICKIROSSER, UNLV, Faculty Senate Chair, representing more than 2,000 faculty members. Today you have heard and will continue to hear many strong points to support higher education in the state of Nevada. And they are all highly important and legitimate reasons to help restore our state's economy and to continue to help support and serve our students effectively. But I'm going to focus on one issue that is an easy get for you at no additional cost to the state, and it will show and provide goodwill on your part to your constituents who work throughout the state in higher education. Please remove the language from the governor's recommended appropriations bill that was previously deleted in 2019 that prohibits the use of state appropriated funds for professional merit increases. The appropriations language needs to be permanently revised to approve the use of available state funds as well as non-state funds for performance-based salary advancement for both academic and administrative faculty. Other words, we recommend that the template language in the 2021 Appropriations Act be replaced with the affirmative statement recommended by the NSHE Performance Pay Task Force. That's it, in a nutshell. A win-win situation and an easy get for all of you on the committee. Thank you for your time and attention to our concerns.
Next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 853. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Doug Unger, UNGER, Government Affairs for Southern Nevada, Nevada Faculty Alliance.
During this pandemic year, while absorbing unprecedented emergency funding cuts ranging from 18% to 24%, depleting reserves, and in proposing this current budget to sustain our institutions despite a further 12% reduction, the Nevada system of higher education and its capable leaders maintain our role as a vital resource for our students in our state. Faculty have done our parts, radically transforming the ways we teach remotely while still training in skills and guiding careers the best we know how. Nevada students deserve applause for the way they have responded, adapted, and overcome difficulties of this health crisis for their educations. As in the Curtis Mayfield song, we just keep on keeping on, as I know all of you do too, amid so many petitions, urgencies, and human concerns during these extraordinary times. The faculty I represent thank you, even as we come to you also with petitions. First, to support the NC budget as presented and recommended by the governor, which is the stripped-down minimum we need until this god-awful pandemic wanes and we can recover. Second, we ask you to remove from appropriations, as you did in 2019, the language prohibiting performance or merit pay that found its way once more into the GovRec budget, and then approve NC's Authorization Act language for the long-term flexible use of state funds. We ask this better to retain faculty, especially diverse younger professors our schools are in danger of losing if they can't reward performance. We promise in return the protection and advancement of scholarship and training to the benefit of our students in Nevada's recovery. We can get through this hard time by working together with your faith and trust. Thank you.
Our next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 686. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, legislators. For the record, Laura Nauman, L-A-U-R-A, Nauman, N as in Nancy, A-U, M as in Mary, A-N-N. I'm an associate professor of psychology and the faculty senate chair at Nevada State College. I represent over 200 full-time academic and administrative faculty and over 600 part-time instructors. I wanted to highlight a few areas that relate to the budget presentation you heard today. First, I wanted to provide some concrete examples of how budget cuts impact our day-to-day operations. On slide 34, CFO Klinger presented how our institutions have and will continue to respond to the 12% statewide cuts asked of all agencies. A bulk of the cuts have resulted in frozen or completely eliminated positions. What this means in practical terms is that we are unable to hire key support staff like advisors, financial aid representatives, or student success tutors that help progress our students to degree completion in a timely fashion. More problematic is the impact on hiring instructional faculty, especially full-time tenure-track faculty who are key to increasing student success. The typical search time to hire a PhD-trained faculty actually takes 2 years. The first year is having those faculty positions approved through an annual budgeting prioritization process, and then it takes a full academic year to hire new tenure-track faculty. This creates problems in terms of planning ahead to try to meet the needs of our students. In fact, both President Sandoval and Hilgersom echoed the sentiment that our faculty and staff are doing more with less. They have increased workloads. Quote, they are wearing many hats, and quote, doing more than their fair share. To this end, I've been employed at Nevada State since 2013. I am one of 35 faculty of color on our staff of over 100 full-time academic faculty. I've only received merit in 2014. I began getting involved in faculty advocacy because I want to help serve Nevada State and make it the place that I want to spend for the bulk of my career. But I want to echo my colleagues that it has been very demoralizing to not see any increases in merit, to recognize the hard work that we have been doing over the past decade and beyond. So I would like to, again, encourage the legislature to add the necessary appropriation language that will allow NC to use its own pools of money to establish a merit pool. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And the next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 837, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. This is Kent Irvin, ERVIN, representing the Nevada Faculty Alliance, the independent association of faculty at NC colleges and universities statewide. We work to empower faculty to be fully engaged in our mission to help students succeed. Chair Carlton, Chair Brooks, and committee members, thank you for working through the NC budget in these difficult times. Higher education is an investment in Nevada's future. Faculty and staff have worked hard to maintain a positive learning environment for students while moving online. Our main NC budget priorities are first to fund GovRec for NC in full, and then restore as much as possible with federal American Rescue Plan funds or other available funds. The enrollment growth caseload maintenance items are essential to all 7 instructional budgets. Any temporary drops for the current year are based on those from past level, so past growth, and the pandemic enrollment drops are concentrated in out-of-state and international students, and those students are not part of the resident weighted student credit hour formulas for state funding. With the rollout of vaccines, we are all anxious to be fully open in the fall, and we expect to see enrollments rebound. Second, the capacity enhancements for the 2- and 4-year colleges to expand career and technical education programs are important to support the governor's workforce development initiatives. And third, and at no cost to the general fund, to start to fix our well-documented faculty salary compression and inversion issues by adding the requested back language to the Appropriations Act. This implements the NC Performance Pay Task Force recommendation for NC to internally fund the compensation system for academic faculty and professional staff. I'll note that classified staff have a funded merit step system in GovRec. This only works if both state and non-state funding can be used, and that requires the Appropriations Act language. This is very important to us to start a long-term process, even if deferred in this budget crisis. Details are in our written exhibit. Despite great efforts to save student programs, the 12% across-the-board cuts to NC budgets will have very serious negative impacts. It will result in fewer instructors, larger class sizes, and fewer available course section times. The professional school and other non-formula budgets are hit worse because of no offsets from enrollment growth. For the deep cuts last year, use of one-time reserves and federal relief funds mitigated the impact, but the reserves are gone. The federal relief funds are largely restricted for student support and for direct COVID-related expenditures, and we are expecting now additional layoffs as hiring freezes are not enough to cover the shortfalls. This budget crisis is worse than the financial crisis 10 years ago because the pandemic is causing loss of non-state revenue at the same time that state funding is decreasing. Thank you for your consideration.
Broadcast Services, do we have anyone else?
Chair, this is Michael from Broadcast. The comment line is open and working. However, we have no callers left at this time.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate all of your assistance today. Thank you, committee, very much for your time and attention, and to the chancellor and to all the presidents. Good job. We appreciate it, and we will let you know as soon as we can schedule our round 2 on this discussion. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.